Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Kentuckian Podcast. Enjoy. Let's talk for a few minutes about where we're at right now. Here on the Kentuckian, we've already talked about a variety of pressing issues: the Second Amendment, benevolent tyranny, communism and socialism, the war between the states, and so on. And a lot of people are talking about a lot of these same subjects. Let's be frank. The situation in this country, as you all know, is quite grim. There's a lot of people out there that want socialism and communism in this country. There's countless riots, a radical Democrat House and Senate, a president with no evidence to legitimize his presidency, if you catch my meaning or my implication there. Our social and moral fibers on the brink of total collapse. The outrageous censorship that is becoming more and more rampant. We've talked about some of this in the 6th episode of the Kentuckian. The caliber of our people is abysmal. Our people are soft. They've forgotten their past. They have no identity as Americans. Many Americans hate their own country and don't even take the time to know anything about it. Being an American means nothing to many Americans. They have no national identity, and many, quite frankly, are spoiled. As long as Americans can keep their comfort, both emotional and physical comfort, the government can make them do anything. As long as they don't have to go out on a limb, they'll do anything. Babies are murdered by the thousands in butcher houses around the country, and many stay silent. Tyranny's knocking on our doors. Things are in many ways quite bad. But let's ask the most important question to ourselves and our fellow Americans. What are you? Yes, you. I'm talking to you, dear listener. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about the situation we're in? We are in dire straits right now, but now is the time to step up. The first main point is that we can't get discouraged. This is the key. Things are bad. I think we can all see that, but we can do something. Things may be dark, but things have been dark before. Are we willing to see the light at the end of the tunnel? Again, are we willing to see the light at the end of the tunnel? Things change. They change often. And while sometimes, maybe even now, we're in what might be considered the calm before the storm, or there's the phrase, things are going to get worse before they get better. But there's an end in sight. World events and situations are always changing, but we have the power to influence. No, we will influence that change either by our actions or our inaction. Hard times may come. We're in a sense in hard times right now, but they will pass as well. We can never lose sight of the big picture. The world is fluid, and we get either discouraged or careless when we think that the world's static. By taking ourselves out of a worldwide, ever-moving process, we only limit ourselves. In the context of today's situation in this country, the bad guy, quote-unquote, wins when we think we're alone, that there's only a few of us left and that it couldn't make a difference even if we tried. They want us to think that it's not worth the effort, but we can stand up and we can make a difference. You can make a difference. Most of the most influential and important changes in world history have been caused at their core by regular people doing their part. See, think of it this way. Individuals accepting a new movement, a new invention, or societal need and doing something about it makes a difference. And I'll kind of explain what I'm talking about more in a second. Any major event affects large amounts of people, as with any major change, right? That's the whole point of it being major. It affects a large group of people. Therefore, regular people have to get on board for that change to happen. Major change in general cannot happen without regular people taking action, or unfortunately, as I mentioned before, not taking action. For example, just to help illustrate this, think about the American war effort in World War II. People worked together to produce, train, arm, supply, and transport the most powerful army in the world, and then fight across the world from the Western Europe to the Pacific, fighting two of the most powerful militaries in the world, outproducing them, outthinking them, and outfighting them. We were able to make hundreds of thousands of planes, tens of thousands of tanks, self-propelled guns, and tank destroyers, millions and millions of rifles and machine guns, countless rounds of ammunition, Just on that note, you think about the magnitude from the numbers that I'm seeing, tens of trillions of rounds seems like a pretty conservative estimate probably for how much we produce. Countless tons of food and innumerable other materiel, bombs, tools, trucks, radios, ships, helmets, clothes, boots, and bandages, right? And the list goes on. The quite literally incomprehensible mass of supplies produced in World War II was accomplished through the individual actions of your average American. That ranged from switching factories from producing cars to producing tanks and bombers, to grandma growing a victory garden and little Timmy collecting rubber scraps for the scrap drive. The seemingly unimportant or insignificant things people did are what made the difference in us being able to win the war. Everyone realized that they could do something, even if it wasn't much, and they did it, and that added up to victory. And that's just one example. Like I said, most major changes in world history are because people did or didn't do something. And that goes into the next point, which is closely related. You can make a difference. Not only does change happen because people do something, the logical conclusion is that you can make a difference. Your average American, your regular person, you can do something and you can change the world. Remember, you can make a difference, but they don't want you to know that. It makes sense. It makes even more sense why they don't want you to really know history, because so many stories in history of regular people making a difference by their individual actions. They don't want you to know that you can do that. They want you to give up, right? We talk about not getting discouraged because of that. They want you to be discouraged. They want you to give up. They want you to think you're powerless. But if you were really powerless, they wouldn't be scared of you. They wouldn't be trying to take anything from you. As we think about that, you really can truly make a difference. General George S. Patton Jr., the famous tank man of World War II, in his famous speech to the Third Army, he made a particularly relevant point to what we're talking about. You can understand it is edited both for length and for cleanliness, as he was somewhat of a foul-mouthed man in many ways. So this is from General George S. Patton's speech to the Third Army, with some slight edits and exclusions. Don't ever think that your job is unimportant. What if every truck driver decided that he didn't like the whine of the shells and turned yellow and jumped headlong into a ditch? He could say to himself, they won't miss me, just one man in thousands. What if every man said that? Where would we be then? No, Americans don't say that. Every man does his job. Every man is important. Patton understood what we must. Doing something to advance the cause, no matter how small, is how we achieve victory. Every single one of us is a cog in the massive machine pushing forward the cause. We may be a small cog or a big cog. It doesn't matter. Every one of us is vital for the machine to function. And if we don't do anything, we're still doing something. We're holding up everyone else. Don't think that burying your head in the sand is a neutral action. It's a negative. It's like a muscle. If it's not becoming stronger, it's getting weaker. A muscle is made up of countless tiny parts, all these little biological motors that work together to let you walk, run, lift, or whatever. And if those individual motors aren't firing properly, the whole muscle becomes increasingly non-functional, useless, and eventually it becomes a hindrance to the rest of the body. The size of your contribution isn't important. It's that you're contributing is what matters at its core. And ironically, the attitude that I'm going to contribute what I can, knowing that it'll make a difference, whether it's large or small, automatically or pushes us to do more if we can. It's not just I'm going to do the bare minimum. If our attitude is what it would be, if our attitude is that we can make a difference, we're going to be motivated to do more than we might initially start out doing. One more example of this, and just how one person's contribution, no matter how small, can be a huge example, can make a huge difference. Jesus Christ in the Gospels made a point to his disciples when a widow put 2 mites into the collection box at the temple. You all may be familiar with that story. They were sitting at the temple and they were observing all these rich Jews that were putting in large amounts of money into the collection box. And this widow came along that put in 2 mites, basically nothing money-wise. And Jesus taught the apostle, or the disciples, the future apostles, however you want to phrase it, an invaluable lesson about sacrifice. Her contribution, the physical contribution that she put into that box was negligible. But her sacrifice, her doing what she knew it was her duty to do, in fact, maybe even more than she could, is still that example, that small action that she took is still used today to teach Christians thousands of years later the importance and the nature of sacrifice, of the kind of attitudes that Christians should have. She made a difference in a way she could probably never even imagine just because she did what she could. I might have taken that a little bit of a different direction than you were expecting. But like, I'm not making the point about sacrifice that Jesus made. I'm making the point of the kind of difference she made in that we use her example to teach today. And that's the thing. We have to believe that we really can make a difference, maybe even in a way that we wouldn't expect. We can make a difference no matter the size of our contribution if our attitude's right. There's a reason that I end every episode saying that if we're doing the right thing, we really can make a difference in this world. I honestly believe it, and I've seen it demonstrated throughout history. You have to believe it too. Now you might ask, how can I help? And this is the second point, and I think where the majority of the rest, our third point, and the majority of the rest of our time will be spent. I want to go over a relatively long list of specific things that you can do, big things, medium-sized things, and little things that you can do to really actually make a difference. Because sometimes we might think that we can make a difference, or even know that we can make a difference, but we don't know how to go about it. We don't know where to start. Even when I started the podcast, I had planned on doing something like this for a long time. I'd put a little bit of work into it here and there. But once I finally made up my mind that I was going to do it, and I made that first episode and I got started, it all just sort of flowed from there. And while it's certainly not necessarily easy to do this all the time, it is much more doable simply because I got started. And I know I'm not the only one that deals with things like that, where once you get started, it's not that bad in many ways, but the hard part is getting started. And so I want to give you some ideas, some specific things, maybe some things you haven't thought of, and also try and bring some perspective to the little things. We're going to start with the big and medium things, but the little things I think are the most important. And part of the reason I save them to the end is to help you, because they are small things, but they make a real difference. And I want to go into a little bit of depth as to how they make a difference, because again, they want you to believe you can't. And going into depth about not only that you can, but how you can make a difference, I think is an effective way to address that. So let's start off with the big things. I have a few things listed, and I don't have as much listed for the big and medium things either. First thing I have listed, you could run for office. Now, obviously, this is a pretty big one, and not everyone's going to want to do that. Not everyone can do that. But one of the core issues with our governmental system is the quality, or the lack thereof, of the vast majority of people in government. We need regular people to run for office. Another thing you could do, you could start a YouTube channel or a podcast. Obviously, right? I've started a podcast, and I've done some stuff with YouTube and everything else. This can be as big or as small as you want it to be in many ways, right? You can put a lot of time into it. You can put a little time into it. But to be sure, and I can speak from experience, this sort of thing does take work. It does take time if you want to do it well. Another thing you could do, you could get a community event together. Maybe like a festival or a rally or something like that. You can work to foster a sense of community and a sense of unity through these sort of events. And there's a lot to it. I have some experience with this sort of thing. Me and some people have actually been trying to plan some things out. And there is quite a bit, but at the same time, it's doable. Another thing, and this could be sort of medium, like a medium-sized action to take, depending on how you look at it, depending on what you decide in the specifics. But another thing you can do is to buy a gun and learn how to use it. Take the time to exercise your Second Amendment protected right, and the money. You don't have to make shooting a new hobby, but you owe it to your countrymen, to your family, and to yourself to exercise that Second Amendment protected right in a responsible manner. If you want more discussion on that subject in general, I've got an episode on the Second Amendment you might like to check out. And this was the last thing I had listed under big things. You could find and take a good history course, a logic class, or some other useful course. Now, this one is, it can be very good, I think. But the thing is, I'm not sure how many options are out there, especially when it comes to the idea of taking a good history course. As you all probably well know, and I know from experience, most college history courses are trash. But at the same time, making a commitment to take a relatively in-depth course, whether it's college or something else, could be a very good way to grow yourself, to learn, to make yourself stronger in many ways. But you just have to be careful in the kind of courses that you're choosing. I've kind of batted around and worked a little bit on a history course myself, but I haven't done very much with it. I would like to work on it more in the future. Logic classes might be easier to find relevant options for. That's also something I would highly recommend. Once you learn the basics of logic, basic logical fallacies, and really see it put out in detail, right? And you learn the methodology. It not only will make you better at making valid logical arguments, it also makes it much easier to pick out the lack of logic or contradictions, things like that, in other people's arguments. And actually, there's an episode topic that I haven't done much work on it yet, but talking about the gotcha argument that people like to use, these sort of end-all be-all arguments that it's difficult to answer because it's like, well, you can't answer that because whatever you would say would delegitimize yourself, that sort of thing. And I'm going to talk about that more in detail, but that has to do with logic and that sort of thing as well. So that'd be a great thing. If you feel comfortable with it, you might even pick something that you know is a bad course, a bad instructional course, and pick it apart. Take notes of what it says falsely, document the manipulations that it has, all those sort of things. And then you can help others that might be taking that course, and of course, make yourself stronger in picking those things out and really taking note to what's being said and all that sort of thing. So that's another option as well. So now I want to get to the quote unquote medium-sized things that you can do, the medium-sized actions you can take. One, you could donate decent amounts of money to a campaign or an organization, a YouTube channel, a podcast, something like that. Maybe there's a regular person, not a politician, that's running for office, or maybe there's an organization that's committed to election integrity, or something of that nature where you can make a sizable donation if you can afford it, of course, and help those people out. On the side of content creators, like a YouTube channel or podcast or something like that, there's some really good options with things like Patreon itself, or similar platforms. Alternative media, as it's sometimes termed, and how necessary it is a sad reality in and of itself, but we don't have time to get into mainstream media manipulation and suppression of the news. But people getting out there and providing alternative and what's often much more accurate methods and modes of thought is vital. And finding one that you really like, or whatever methodology you would use to choose who you would support, makes a huge difference if you're willing to make the commitment. And again, I'm talking in this case about a relatively sizable commitment. We'll talk about smaller monetary actions later. But these people, just think about it. These people need this support to keep doing what they're doing. The monetization schemes of bigger platforms like YouTube and stuff, they're problematic to say the least oftentimes. And especially when you're talking about people that are saying things that are not quote unquote mainstream accepted, it usually takes the direct support of fans for them to keep making content. Even though theoretically you should be able to make a living off of YouTube or other things, there's so many political issues that it is oftentimes impossible or near impossible. Think about it. You've got to eat. You have to pay rent. You got to keep the lights on. And the people that are out there making this content generally have little to no income security. They can't work a full-time job and produce this stuff. It takes work and it takes time. And making a donation, finding someone that you really want to support or whatever, maybe one particular person, really does make a big difference for them and for the work that they're doing. Another medium-sized thing I had, this can be big or little depending on your involvement, but join a local militia. I'm not going to spend much time on this. I've talked about this sort of thing some already. Again, if you want to, you could check out my episode on the Second Amendment. It's just something to consider, something to think about as a potential option. Militias aren't a new thing, although they have been dragged through the mud by the mainstream media in the last few decades. I could talk about this more, but don't be afraid to consider that option. It is a serious thing, though. I would say, don't take it lightly. And like I said, I'm not going to spend much time on it, but I do want to leave you with one thought. It's a lot easier to pick off patriots one by one than if they're organized and working together. And that goes for any of this, really. It's a lot easier to single people out and to deal with them that way than it is to deal with them as a group. That's why they want you to, at its core, that's why they want you to think you're alone and that you can't do anything because nobody else is on your side. So moving on, another thing that you could do is you could volunteer to help set up a community event. We talked about maybe starting a community event, forming a community event, planning it out, maybe putting some of your own money down, that sort of thing. And maybe you can't or don't know how to do that. Maybe you're not qualified. You don't really feel you could do a good job. But you know what? They still need people to make it run. They still need volunteers to run booths and to set up stages or whatever they have lined out, and you can still make a difference that way. You could write letters to or emails to your congressman, your and attorney general, governors, etc. This one also depends on how extensive you get into it as to whether it would be a large or medium or small time commitment. It's not really that hard, but it can take some time depending on how much you choose to do, how many you decide to send out, and so on. And especially when it comes to like state and local politics, especially state politics, from my experience, they do often see these things. They do see messages that are sent to them by constituents. Think of it this way: active constituents are voting constituents. If they're willing to write a letter, they're probably going to get out and vote. And even politicians can see that. It's kind of ironic. They say the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Maybe we need to squeak a little more sometimes. Maybe we need to make a little more noise. And part of the issue is they talk about the silent majority. You may have heard that term for a bunch of people that don't agree with maybe the direction the country is going, but they don't say anything about it. Well, part of the issue is they don't say anything about it. Again, this isn't necessarily a lot of stuff. Maybe you send one email, right? But that's still one email, and that still makes a difference. You could volunteer for other relevant organizations or charities. This goes right along with the community event point. It's in the same vein as, volunteering some time to help these people out. Just don't limit yourself to like a festival. There are worthy charities out there, nonprofits and the like that need help as well. Be involved in your community. That's kind of the general idea behind it. Another thing you could do, you can watch videos and read relevant articles, right? Take time to try and educate yourself, but perhaps not take a full-fledged class, right? It's usually less involved and it can, in general, have better content depending on what you're taking in. But you can get good overviews and general arguments for just about any subject: politics, history, climate alarmism, literature, science, whatever, right? But it has the benefit of you can also usually go really in depth depending on how you want to go about maybe a particular subject interests you more, and you can go super in depth through these things as well. And now I want to talk about the little things. And remember, even though they're quote unquote little things, they're not necessarily big commitments or take a lot of effort, they make a big difference. And if you can do more than that, great, but do what you can. In fact, you might even think some large things that you can do are doing a bunch of these little things, or staying really active with the little stuff. And that's a big thing in many ways, but it makes a big difference, right? First one I have listed: pray. Why not take a moment out of your day to request guidance for yourself and our country from the Almighty Creator of the universe? Prayer works, folks, and it shouldn't be something that we should keep in our back pockets until things get really bad. Again, it doesn't have to be a long prayer, but it makes a difference. Another small thing you can do: vote. And unfortunately, the last election cycle has thrown some doubt onto the effectiveness of this avenue. That's a whole can of worms to open right there. But we should definitely, either way, still get out there to vote. Remember, the big numbers that determine a winner in an election are made up of individual votes. You talk about this person had 30 million votes, just pick a number, right? Well, 30 million votes is made up of 30 million individual votes. Every one adds up. And just because you have one vote, you might be one of millions that gets a victory that our country really needs. Another thing you can do that's relatively small: you can read a book. Reading a good book, whether it's fiction, history, nonfiction, political, whatever topic it's on, a good book is a vital way to grow yourself, become more confident in your beliefs, and it's also key to being able to reason effectively. It helps you think better. A lot of people talk about, I don't want to get too far off track, I'm running short on time, but Even fiction books. Personally, I found that fiction books, good fiction, can really help you think better, can help you think in different ways, give you new perspectives, and make you a stronger person. Another thing, you could take a moment to think about what news and other stuff that you take in on a daily basis. This one's pretty straightforward, but that's the thing. We do need to just slow down sometimes and just think about what we're doing and what we're bringing into our minds, in news especially, but even in entertainment and other areas. Just slow down. Everybody, we're all knocking each other out to try and be the first at whatever. We have to do everything fast. We have to, just a constant stream of action, and just slowing down and taking a little bit of a break, basically, and thinking about what's going on around us makes a big difference. Another thing you can do, take a break from the news and rejuvenate. This follows along the same lines as the previous point. And while it's important to keep up with the news, of course, sometimes it would do good to just take a week and not pay any attention to the news. It helps give you some fresh perspective, remind you what's really important in life, that there are good people out there, and that not all hope is lost. You'll come back stronger from taking a little bit of a break and just rejuvenating your mind and your soul to a certain degree. Another one, hit the like button on a YouTube video you like. This may not seem like a big thing, but it is huge. There's a reason that YouTubers are always mentioning subscribe, hit that like button, comment, turn on notifications, etc. It triggers algorithms that affect exposure and how their videos are recommended and how many people see their content. And that affects things like ad revenue, the sponsors they get, and of course the actual reach of their content, how many people they're reaching with whatever it is they're producing. You can make a comment on a YouTube video. This is basically the same deal, but making a good comment also helps focus the audience. I think it helps avoid those virtual yelling matches that often start in the comment section. I've seen very good comment sections, but the stereotype of the fights in comment sections still holds true for far too many. And again, you can make a difference, even if it's just a basic comment. You can make a small donation to a cause or a YouTube channel or podcast or whatever, right? And this goes along with the next point, so I'll kind of discuss both together. You could also become a small-time Patreon, or again, some other platform similar to Patreon, where it's more of a yearly or monthly thing, but still small scale, right? Do you realize the difference that you can make by donating $1? Or maybe $1 a month if you're doing something like Patreon? That's only $12 a year. Although many can afford more, right? Just $1 makes a huge difference. If someone has a reach of, say, 100,000 listeners, YouTube channel, podcast, whatever, if each one of them donates $1, that person, that creator, is set for an entire year or two. Set, right? If half give $1, 50,000, they'll be able to live comfortably for a year or longer, depending on how much they stretch it, right? For most places. You all can do the math. It does make a difference, but you have to take that action. Even an action as small as that truly does add up. Never forget that. $1, when a lot of people do it, makes a huge difference. And that's what we're talking about, right? Even something small, when regular people take that action, makes a difference. Don't be afraid, and I'm going to go a little bit faster. I'm running low on time. Don't be afraid to bring up politics and religion in conversation from time to time. By convincing people that it's impolite or it'll offend someone to talk about politics and religion, we've created a nation that's ignorant in politics and religion. It's a tool to destroy the discourse necessary for a free country. You don't have to talk about it all the time, but come on, people. Politics and religion are determining factors in how we live, how our children live, and the destination of our eternal souls. We should be talking about it. We can talk about sports and everything, right? Why shouldn't we talk about this? Share something that you've liked, found helpful, or want to support on Facebook or Instagram, other social media. Tell a friend or neighbor, right? I'm not going to spend much time on that. The last point that I want to make before we conclude, and this is the most important, I saved it for last, and this is both a large and a small thing. If you really want to get to the core of all the issues today, all the dangers of looming tyranny and other lunacies, it boils down to a lack of God. The most important thing you can do for yourself and for others is to seek to do the will of God, to have an honest desire to conform your will to God's will. If you foster that desire, all other issues will be dealt with in time, with study and as you grow. Remember, folks, you can make a difference. I don't have much time. Due to the nature of this episode, I'll forgo the request for support that I normally have. My Patreon will be linked in the description, and you can contribute to me directly on Anchor. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please reach out to me. And always remember, as long as you and I are doing the right thing, we can make a real difference in this world. The Kentuckian, trying to make a difference one person at a time.